Not everything that can be done should be done, and some things, no matter how good and needed they might appear on the surface, should be avoided at all costs. Apple and Google, the global duopoly of mobile operating systems, are building a mass surveillance system that will be remotely introduced into every connected iPhone and Android device in the world. The aim is to help government, health authorities, and a broader ecosystem of apps trace contacts of people infected with the novel virus. But as the fears of the crisis are on the rise, this is one of those good intentions that's paving our way into a dystopian mass surveillance future, much like the Patriot Act has been doing since 9/11. We need to have a serious discussion about measures that will fundamentally alter the way we live our modern lives. Complacency and blind trust in authorities is the worst thing we can do in times of this crisis. This new contact tracing technology, currently under development by Apple and Google, requires some serious investigation. Before I continue, I fear YouTube will try to bury this video as much as possible, but your engagement does help to fight off algorithmic censorship. Go crazy with likes and comments. Share this all over social media if you believe this debate is important. If you are financially well off, please support this series by donating to my Patreon, where you get access to my weekly commentary videos. Thank you very much for your support. Both of the giants announced the measures on their blogs. The first measure will be released in what's called Application Programming Interfaces. API is what helps app developers better integrate their apps within a given operating system and take advantage of its certain features. The problem is that the owners of the operating systems are in control of the APIs, and they are able to release API updates without users having to do anything or even knowing about it. In this case, Google will push API updates onto phones without any cooperation of device manufacturers, carriers, or users, and the updates will go as far back as Android 6. Apple has the same capability with iOS. On both Android and iOS, users will still need to download an official app from health authorities. They'll be available to them from Google Play Store or iOS App Store. Apple and Google say they won't be releasing health apps of their own. So in effect, no smartphone user have the ability to express consent upon forced API updates. There will be no voting on this, no public discourse, no debate. Just two tech giants and the government making decisions about lives of hundreds of millions of people. Users will only be able to give consent when they decide to install an official health app released from the government. And thus, Apple and Google will start creating a database of all of the phones within your Bluetooth range, which is about 100 to 200 feet. When you test positive for the virus, you can then install the official health app and broadcast your status to all of the devices in the database. This will alert all of the users that have been in your range over the past 2 weeks, supposedly without giving out your identity or location. The second measure will be released in following months and will broaden contact tracing based on Bluetooth Low Energy into a platform of its own. In the giant's own words, this operating system level solution is there to invite more individuals and developers, and not just health authorities, to tap into the database and create their own apps. So potentially, any claim Google and Apple make about transparency, privacy, and consent will be exacerbated by the nature of advertising-driven ecosystem of mobile apps. It will open up the doors for an unlimited number of third parties to capitalize on the newly available stream of highly sensitive data of users. Apple and Google will try to reassure you that they will not be collecting any personally identifiable information. But that's a non sequitur. First of all, there is no clear distinction between personal data and personally identifiable data, but both can lead to your identity. Even if you strip away obvious identifiers like names or zip codes, how many people share your circle of contacts, frequent shops, waking hours, interests, or occupation? And second, both Google and Apple hold or have access to other identifiable information that can be linked with the anonymized database of contact tracing and reveal individuals. They still know your device information, contacts, phone numbers, location, or unique phone IDs, all of which can be tied to your data from the contact tracing system. It is impossible to guarantee anonymity of location data once that's connected to another database. Re-identification of anonymous databases has been an easy task for researchers for decades. With 3 to 4 data points, you could re-identify 87 to 95% of anonymous cases. With modern AI, it may take less than an hour to find 84% of identities in an anonymous database. In one study, the success rate went all the way to 99.98% with just 15 demographic attributes. Now, take into account that tech companies like Apple and Google hold thousands of data points on you. No amount of anonymization of contact tracing is going to mean anything on the long enough timeline. And that timeline is important, as we'll reveal in a moment. Google stated it will not be collecting user location data, but in practice, this cannot be true. Some location information will have to be used, so that a user based in Los Angeles won't have to download a full database of users from New York. Google publicly documented that downloading broadcast keys of positive cases will in fact be based on users' regions, but the search giant refused to provide further specification. But it does mean that iOS and Android devices will have to communicate some location data to the central server. Furthermore, Bluetooth technology has inherent privacy issues. With Bluetooth turned on, your phone broadcasts its presence to nearby devices and its signals can be easily picked up and identified. Your device can have a fixed MAC address or show an explicitly identifiable name. These can be picked up by antenna boosters that cover large areas, which can be used for mapping and correlation attacks. Malicious actors can thus de-anonymize targeted users of contact tracing apps or wreak havoc by spamming false alerts. What's worse is that this attack can be done passively by simply observing the central server to see if a targeted user reports a positive test. And now let's get to that important timeline. Much like with Patriot Act after 9/11, these contact tracing measures are also promised to be temporary and immediately discarded once the pandemic fades away. But near 2 decades later, Patriot Act hasn't expired. In fact, the government's surveillance powers has grown ever since, to the point where in the name of national security, the intelligence community is collecting private information on everybody by default, just in case it might come in handy in the future. What we can at least partially blame for this was a lack of clear goal. We never envisioned when it would be the end of counterterrorism. After taking out the mastermind behind it, the surveillance did not stop there, but expanded. What is the end goal of contact tracing during this pandemic? When do we determine it is no longer necessary? When we reach the tipping point? When we flatten the curve? When we no longer see a consequent spike in new cases? Should we keep these measures in place just in case second wave would arrive, as many predict? Why can we keep contact tracing in place for a potential future pandemic? And why not use it for other viral outbreaks? And why stop at health crises? Why not use contact tracing to fight organized crime? Or track drug dealers, their suppliers and buyers? What's to stop us from taking advantage of such precise and real-time surveillance to make public transport more convenient? Why not use contact tracing to detect and deter voter fraud, manage immigration? Are we really gonna trust the same government or corporations that have been abusing their power since the Patriot Act that they won't do it this time? We know that citywide shutdown in Wuhan ended in the first week of April, but the Chinese government is still surveilling its citizens. And in the case of Singapore, the government there was among the first to put blind trust in contact tracing, but decided to go for a full lockdown when tracking people proved insufficient. Google and Apple say that most of the data from contact tracing will be stored locally on people's phones for the duration of the crisis. But the concern is, what happens to that data once the pandemic is over? There is a precedent that the tech giants won't keep their word and will use the data for their next big project. In 2015, Google illegally acquired identifiable records of 1.6 million patients from a UK healthcare trust. Google's DeepMind then used real patient data to develop and test a new health app called Streams. Google then promised it wouldn't be connecting patient information from DeepMind Health with their Google accounts. But in 2018, Google moved the DeepMind subsidiary under its own wings and bridged the sensitive health data with Google services. What was the reasoning behind it? Google wanted the Streams app to scale globally. Should we expect Apple and Google to resist the temptation to scale the contact tracing tech globally when the opportunity arises? What's most tragically deceiving about contact tracing is that it is fundamentally inadequate. Any such system would still heavily rely on testing. Test kits for this disease have been imperfect to say the least, and oftentimes led to false positives or negatives. But even with completely accurate testing, the capacity is still going to be limited, and contact tracing would even further overwhelm the demand for tests. So in the end, constant Bluetooth-based mass surveillance would be of little to no help because of the bottleneck of standard testing. yet we are still expected to sacrifice so much of our freedom and privacy. Professor of Security Engineering at the University of Cambridge, Ross Anderson, warned about several major flaws in the design of contact tracing technology. Anderson warns that Apple and Google cannot promise equal levels of privacy and security. If they opted for a centralized structure, then all the data would be flowing into one location and create a single point of failure, very lucrative to hackers and advertisers willing to pay premiums for access to such a database. If they stick with a decentralized app development with peer-to-peer communication, then releasing daily security patches and updates to 169 different types of phone will be a painful task that is bound to leave gaping holes ready to be exploited by malicious actors. Others add that Bluetooth tracing will have some fundamental flaws, like not being able to recognize people in close proximity but separated by walls in different rooms, or not distinguishing between walking past a positive case on the street and touching a contaminated surface, not to mention the other half of the global population that doesn't have access to smartphones or the internet. The Economist boldly criticizes Apple and Google and calls them out. If they really wanted to help, they'd use their engineering manpower to solve more urgent problems, like optimizing supply chains for medical equipment and not building a mass surveillance system. This video is not here to say the talented engineers at Google and Apple are bad people with malicious intentions. It points out to the dangerously luring corporate incentives, the invasive nature of digital advertising and data mining, and that we shouldn't blindly rally behind whatever the government authorities tell us is the best thing to do. We should be careful how much safety we are calling for, because one day we might wake up and realize we are living in a country-sized prison. I expect Google to heavily punish this video, so please, let's try to fight the algorithm with high engagement, like ratio, and of course, sharing. I have a Patreon page where you can access my weekly commentaries and support this series. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you for watching.